Starliner has spent over 50 days in space, far exceeding the initial plan of just about 8 days. That's more than 6 times the expected period, and this raises lots of questions about the future of this spacecraft. Boeing and NASA are likely facing significant challenges in maintaining the Starliner project. With increasing difficulties, is Boeing considering giving up on this project? And how has NASA reacted to the current situation? Let's find out more in today's episode of Alpha Tech. After many weeks of troubleshooting and tests to simulate the issues occurring with Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, the latest press conference on 25th revealed that the results from NASA and Boeing are unchanged. Starliner is still not ready to set a return date for the 2 astronauts on its first manned test flight.
We don't have a major announcement today relative to a return date,
said NASA Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch. Starliner's return to Earth has been repeatedly delayed since its initial planned re-entry about a week after launch. It was then pushed to no earlier than June 18th, then June 22nd, then June 25th, now late July. Now Starliner and its crew aren't expected back until August at the earliest. This is an outcome that disappoints almost everyone, but it's clear we anticipated this. The issues with Starliner are not trivial. They have become, or perhaps were from the beginning, more serious than ever. Honestly, I don't want to think this way, but looking at the press conference about Boeing's first flight, it seems evident that NASA and Boeing never mentioned the main issues. Kind of like they're trying to cover up deeper problems. Perhaps officials feared that openly admitting the current journey is too risky or would spur more sensationalist news. Or maybe NASA's leaders just want to protect Boeing. After all, they do plan to send up more crews on Starliner, and any sign of disappointment from the space agency could erode public confidence in their already troubled contractor. NASA would do better if they embraced the uncertainty instead of avoiding it. To borrow a mantra from the agency itself, the first manned flight of Starliner is a test mission. Unusual events, they're predictable, and NASA believes that they are well equipped to handle them. But no matter what, only time's going to tell. If NASA and Boeing can't step it up, they're going to have to turn to alternative means to safely bring the astronauts back home. And no one can do this but SpaceX. If this happens, Starliner will officially face a disastrous failure in its entire development program, and its future will be, of course, there will be no future. Starliner is still too flawed to continue with manned missions to the ISS. However, even if Starliner succeeds in the return, its future development is fraught with difficulties, and it still has the potential to get canceled. Why is that? Well, we can see that there are not many Boeing officials speaking up to defend their ship. Space is just a part of Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security business unit. And in Boeing's revenue by sector in 2023, BDS just generated 32% of the company's revenue at nearly $25 billion. It's worth noting that $25 billion are also made up of non-space activities like contracts for the military helicopters, fighter jets, and munitions. Meanwhile, the company's financial strength lies in its commercial aircraft business, which brought in nearly $33 billion, or 44% of 2023's revenue. When Boeing's commercial planes encountered a series of troubles, costing the company at least $32 billion since 2019 and no end in sight, it was a major blow to the over 100-year-old firm. Economically, Boeing's Starliner shows no profit, with prolonged heavy losses, and now the company has to bear the costs themselves as the government can no longer fund them. This is not to mention other issues like technical problems with the spacecraft, which are very difficult for Boeing to solve even down the road, and competition in the launch market with dominant rivals like SpaceX's Dragon. These points raise questions about the future of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft manufacturing niche. Overall, I assess that Starliner's program does not have a long-term path. Even if Boeing has to abandon Starliner, it's not going to be significantly impacted financially. This is provided that the company fulfills the 6 missions assigned under the commercial crew contract that was awarded by NASA. On the other hand, NASA needs to recognize Boeing no longer wants Starliner to compete and should therefore focus on collabing with SpaceX to further develop the Dragon spacecraft. Boeing's also shown a lack of focus in their space sector, as evidenced by their agreement to sell ULA, a joint venture rocket manufacturing and launch company, as a first step. The Starliner program will be the next step. So, what do you think of this speculation? Please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And while you're at it, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. All right, In addition to the announcement that there's no return date for the two astronauts, the press conference 25th from NASA and Boeing's leadership also gave us some possible answers about the causes of Starliner's problems in the first leg of this journey, including helium leaks and thrusters suddenly dropping on the way to the ISS. These revelations came after Boeing and NASA spent the last few weeks investigating the real issues and planning for additional tests, which will serve as a highlight to better understand the problems, said Mark Nappy, Boeing's Commercial Crew Program Director. At a site in New Mexico, engineers fired test engines more than 1,000 times, replicating how the thrusters on the spacebound Starliner would have ignited. They then fired the thruster to try out several ways the engines might fire on the way home from space, according to Boeing. The goal of this testing was to gain a better understanding of why the spacecraft's thrusters unexpectedly shut down and what, if any, dangers are associated with turning those thrusters back on. Officials said that they were able to recreate how the thrusters in space deteriorated during flight with the ground tests. The testing may have helped give engineers a better understanding of the issue's root cause. Heat building up inside the thrusters may be causing Teflon seals to bulge, restricting the flow of propellant. The testing has given us additional confidence to undock and return, Nappy said. The findings also prompted Boeing and NASA to abandon plans to allow astronauts to manually fly the Starliner spacecraft on the way home, as they did briefly on the way up to the ISS. Some of the manual maneuvering put some extra stress on the thrusters, Stitch said. Still, officials did not definitively say Thursday that Starliner spacecraft is what carried veteran NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams to the space station, and if it'd be the same vehicle that brought them back home. There's a lot of good reasons to complete this mission and bring Butch and Suni home on Starliner, Stitch said, after noting that NASA does have contingency options if Starliner does not get the approval to bring the astronauts back. We need to get through the process, he added. We have another critical Starliner mission management team to review all the thruster data we just talked about. Of course, I'm very confident we have a good vehicle to bring the crew back with, Nappy said. Williams and Wilmore arrived at the International Space Station June 6th for what was expected to be a roughly week-long mission. As of Thursday, the astronauts have been in space for about 50 days. NASA has indicated that Starliner can stay in space for a maximum of 90 days. Separately, engineers have made headway in understanding helium leaks that hampered the first leg of Starliner's journey. But Boeing and NASA will take a close look at the issue again during additional testing of the vehicle in space that will continue this weekend, Stitch said. The testing will include the firing of 27 Starliner thrusters while the vehicle remains docked at the ISS. Analysis of components on the ground, specifically a version of the Starliner service module that's been sitting in White Sands, New Mexico for 3 years, has showed that the helium leaks may be a result of seals that have gotten degraded because of exposure to propellant vapor, according to Nappy. The natural fix is to just change that seal out to a material that's not so susceptible to being worn down by exposure by the propellant, Nappy said, referring to possible changes that Boeing can make for future Starliner missions. Still ahead, however, is work to determine whether the leaks on board the Starliner that's already in space have gotten worse as the vehicles remain docked at the ISS. Because the service module, that's the portion of the spacecraft plagued by the helium leaks, on the ground was exposed to propellant for so long. Nappy said it could offer a worst-case understanding of how badly the seals can be degraded. The ongoing effort to understand the helium leak is among the chief reasons why NASA and Boeing still aren't able to give us a return date for Williams and Wilmore or a definitive answer on whether Starliner is ready to fly them back home. The key attributes of the flight rationale really are that we understand the helium leaks. We understand the stability of the leaks and how we can manage those should they get bigger, Stitch said, referring to the possibility that the leaks affecting the Starliner service module may worsen. NASA and Boeing plan to carry out a review to plan for Starliner's undocking, which could come as late next week, according to Stitch. Starliner is not only a failure in terms of Boeing's reputation, but also a significant financial setback for the company. The spacecraft launched many years late and is currently stuck on the International Space Station. Yikes! Moreover, the project has turned into a financial disaster, with double the spending compared to its competitor SpaceX's Dragon. Truly alarming. When it comes to space exploration, aside from mentioning SpaceX, another topic that frequently comes up is money. Lots of it. Not too surprising, given that past space engineering projects have always drained government budgets. However, to date, public perception of this issue has significantly changed, largely thanks to the groundbreaking efforts of Elon and SpaceX in cost optimization. SpaceX is not only leading the industry, but also has become a model for other companies to follow. After all, they hope that at some point, space travel will no longer just be limited to big corporations, wealthy billionaires, and government agencies, but it'll actually be accessible to regular Joes like you and me. However, contrary to the majority, there's still some players in the space industry who have not been able to reduce costs and have instead made them skyrocket to unacceptable levels. At the top of this list is Boeing and their space programs. Recently, Boeing announced another financial charge related to the troubled Starliner commercial crew program, raising the company's total loss on Starliner to $1.6 billion. That's with a B. In its quarterly earnings report, Boeing recorded a $125 million loss for Starliner, blaming delays in the spacecraft's ongoing crew flight test, the program's first mission to get astronauts in orbit. And that's not the first time Starliner's caused financial losses for Boeing. The company incurred a $288 million loss on Starliner last year, including $257 million in the second quarter last year after the company postponed the CFT mission to this year. Since 2016, the total amount the company's lost on the project is going to reach nearly $1.6 billion, including the newly announced change July 31st. These losses are primarily due to repeated schedule delays and additional work needed to address the spacecraft's technical issues. Looking back a decade when NASA awarded Boeing a $4.2 billion contract to build Starliner, the spacecraft was initially expected to be ready to carry astronauts into space by the end of 2017. However, reality has strayed far from expectations. Now, the first crewed flight of Starliner is expected to happen June 5th, 2024, nearly 7 years behind the original plan. Overall, since 2010, Starliner program has cost NASA and Boeing at least $6.7 billion, according to the latest financial loss announcement. This spending includes the development of the spacecraft, tests, and the government's commitment to 6 manned flights using Starliner. In contrast, Crew Dragon's programs by SpaceX, though it only started carrying astronauts up into space in 2020, has a total contract value with NASA for equivalent missions that exceeds just $3.1 billion. However, because SpaceX is a private company, it's difficult to determine the exact level of their actual investment in this project. In terms of progress, SpaceX has successfully completed all 6 manned flights for NASA. On the other hand, Boeing is expected to take at least another year before it can start operating Starliner. Given Boeing's delays, NASA's decided to extend their contract with SpaceX, adding 8 more round-trip flights to the ISS, stretching late into this decade. So, what's the reason for this big failure? Well, the excuses from Boeing's officials haven't changed compared to previous losses. They always blame the fixed-price contract structure. The company noted that the losses were part of $1 billion in charges on fixed-price programs in its defense and space business unit recorded in the quarter, including work on the KC-46A tanker aircraft and the VC-25B aircraft that'll be the next Air Force One. Clearly, the results this quarter are disappointing, said Dave Calhoun, the outgoing chief executive of Boeing, on the call, referring to the losses on those fixed-price contracts. We expect the fixed-price development programs to remain bumpy till we complete the development phase and transition to mature long-term franchise programs. That's made Boeing wary about taking on future fixed-price work in that business unit. Based on the lessons we learned in taking on these fixed-price development programs, we've maintained contracting discipline for all future opportunities, he said. Boeing has not ruled out additional losses on Starliner in the future, particularly as the first operational mission, Starliner 1, gets delayed from February 2025 to no earlier than August 2025. The risk remains that we may record additional losses in future periods, the company said in an SEC filing. But the reality we see is quite different. Take a look at SpaceX. They've excelled with fixed-price contracts, which NASA uses for certain elements of Artemis, aimed at sending astronauts to the moon. For example, NASA selected SpaceX and Blue Origin, the space company owned by Jeff Bezos, for fixed-price contracts to develop crewed lunar landers. SpaceX also got a fixed-price contract to provide NASA with a vehicle to deorbit the ISS at the end of its lifespan. This really shows how Boeing's performance is increasingly getting worse. With the Starliner program, Boeing had begun developing spacecraft periodically since the 60s, but those who worked there in the 60s, they're no longer there. So the organization's institutional knowledge has been lost. Additionally, Boeing is considering exiting the space sector because in reality, space is not a major source of revenue for Boeing. The company earned $78 billion in total revenue last year, and it's estimated that only about 10% of that comes from spacecraft. This is the most vulnerable sector among all their business units. Boeing also recognizes the competition and growth of new rocket companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX. To be honest, for Boeing, when they consider business units that could be liquidated to generate cash, space is at the top of the list. That's why any complaints or blame contract regulations from Boeing can be seen as an indication that they're seeking more government support. Otherwise, they might have no choice but to make their exit. What do you think about this? Let us know in the comments so we can talk about it together. And make sure you like and subscribe our channel. All right, let's get back into it. Due to the company's prolonged financial losses, on July 31st, Boeing also appointed a new CEO, Robert Kelly Ortberg, who was the former CEO of supplier Rockwell Collins, will be its new CEO effective August 8th, replacing retiring Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun, who's been under fire lately for the company's problems. He's seen as a potential figure who could save Boeing from its current quagmire. It's quite curious to see how he'll handle the issues with a first crewed Starliner flight and whether the program's future will be cut short, as I speculate. Let's wait and see Ortberg's new decisions when he officially takes over this once leading aviation giant. Regarding the status of Starliner, Boeing and NASA have both stated that the tests they conducted on Starliner's thrusters have shown some positive signs. Both teams are very happy with the results, Chloe Mering, NASA's flight director for Starliner, said in a statement. The agency also said that it had verified that the Starliner's propulsion system was stable and that helium leak rates had not increased in a way that could jeopardize a return back to Earth. The helium system is going to get checked again before the Starliner capsule undocks from the space station, according to NASA. Wilmore and Williams were seated inside the Starliner capsule during the hot fire test as part of their return preparations, NASA said. The thrusters are crucial for maneuvering the spacecraft in orbit, such as when the capsule approaches the space station and when it backs away from the outpost during the undocking process. The capsule's reaction control thrusters are also used to guide it into the proper position before a different set of engines gets fired to begin the journey out of orbit. The in-orbit Starliner tests came weeks after work on the ground using a test engine at NASA's White Sands Test Facility in New Mexico. Teams subjected that engine and thrusters, which were developed for future Starliner flights, to conditions similar to those that the capsule experienced on its way to the space station. Engineers also replicated conditions that Starliner will experience as it undocks and prepares to re-enter the atmosphere. In the coming days, NASA and Boeing officials will assess data from all the tests to date and may conduct a formal review to discuss when to bring the capsule and its astronaut crew back home. NASA has not set a target landing date for the mission, but said there are opportunities throughout August. Initially, NASA had set a 45-day time limit for Wilmore and Williams to stay at the space station because of constraints with the Starliner's capsule batteries. However, agency officials said this month that the batteries were being recharged while the spacecraft was docked, thus lowering the risk of extending the capsule's time in orbit. With this mission, Boeing was hoping to prove that its Starliner capsule could safely ferry astronauts to and from the International Space Station, a key step before NASA can authorize the company to conduct routine flights to the orbiting outpost. Rival company SpaceX has been transporting NASA astronauts since 2020. Starliner's first uncrewed test flight in 2019 also encountered problems and was cut short after software glitches prevented the capsule from attempting to dock at the space station. Subsequent fuel valve issues caused several delays before the vehicle succeeded in docking at the space station without a crew in 2022. Then, in the spring, the NASA astronauts' launch was delayed twice before they finally lifted off. Wilmore and Williams' lengthy stay on the space station makes the orbiting outpost more crowded, but mission managers have said that there are enough supplies and resources aboard to accommodate them. As they await their return to Earth, Williams and Wilmore have been conducting science experiments and assisting with various space station duties alongside the 7 crew members, 4 NASA astronauts and 3 Russian cosmonauts, who were already stationed there. "This is a tough business that we're in," Wilmore said this month in a news briefing from the space station. "Human spaceflight's not easy in any regime, and there have been multiple issues with any spacecraft that's ever been designed, and that's just the nature of what we do." The terrifying adventure of the Starliner crew continues, leaving many curious about how it's going to end. However, contrary to public expectations, the ending will be just as risky as the earlier events. NASA has announced that 2 astronauts will still return on the Starliner. No Dragon, no support here. So why has NASA made this decision, and how are the astronauts reacting? Boeing Starliner spacecraft and its crew have been in space for over a month, much longer than the initially planned 1 week. However, the 2 astronauts piloting this historic test mission mostly praised the vehicle that took them to the International Space Station, marking the first crewed flight of the spacecraft manufactured by Boeing. In a short press briefing from the space station, Barry Butch Wilmore, a veteran of 2 previous space flights, said that we're absolutely confident in the return trip and that despite the issues on the way to the station, Starliner was truly impressive. Still, as he took over manual control of the autonomous spacecraft as it approached the station June 6th, he could tell that the thrust was degraded, he said. At the time, we didn't know why, obviously. The failures had just happened. You could tell it was degraded, but it was still impressive. Sunita Williams, who's on her 3rd space flight, said she has a real good feeling in my heart that the spacecraft will bring us home no problem. But when that will happen is still unclear. Although they've undergone 3 review and problem-solving meetings as of the most recent meeting, July 10th, NASA and Boeing officials still do not have a satisfactory answer for the return date of the 2 astronauts currently on the ISS. Steve Stitch, who oversees NASA's commercial crew program, is optimistic that the Starliner will come back by the end of July. This is merely an estimated time frame, and it wouldn't be surprising if the return date for the 2 astronauts is further delayed. However, it is certain that NASA and Boeing will never abandon the Starliner and rely on another spacecraft to bring the 2 astronauts back to Earth. In a briefing late last month, he said that the crew members were not stuck in space and that there were no plans for any kind of rescue operation. I want to make it clear that Butch and Suni aren't stranded in space, he said. Our plan is to continue to return them on Starliner and return them home at the right time. On Wednesday, he reiterated that the
prime option today is to return Butch and Sonny on Starliner. Right now, we don't see any reason that that wouldn't be the case.
Referring to SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft, he added,
we have two vehicles, 2 different systems that we could use to return crew, and so we have a little bit more time to go through the data and then make a decision as to whether we need to do anything different.
He added that there's
been no discussion with sending another Dragon to rescue the Starliner crew.
To be honest, I know that astronauts are deliberately saying flattering words about Starliner to reassure the public, but I'm certain that deep down, each of them also has a little bit of fear. However, Starliner is under the management of major U.S. government agencies, which truly don't allow it to fail, and even those who sit on Starliner to return to Earth are not allowed to turn their backs on it. Therefore, NASA will certainly not use SpaceX's Crew Dragon, and as of now, Crew Dragon's not part of their plans. Despite the fact that Dragon's proven to be very reliable for crewed flights, NASA and Boeing can't afford to lose face, especially with all the other rival countries around the world like China and Russia closely watching the flight of the top U.S. government agency. Hey, if you like this content, give us a like and subscribe. It'd be great motivation for us to keep making videos for you every day. All right, getting back into it. The question arises, after completing the first test flight of Starliner, can NASA abandon Boeing's Starliner in the distant future? Although it's not what everyone wants to hear, the reality is that NASA's unlikely to eliminate Starliner. The reason lies in the interdependent relationship between NASA and its contractors, similar to the relationship between military and defense suppliers. When a government agency like NASA relies on a few suppliers with exclusive expertise, they're forced to maintain the existence of these partners to ensure long-term competitiveness. NASA can't afford the risk of Boeing withdrawing from the space industry, although this possibility is low. Boeing's withdrawal would reduce the number of capable contractors, creating an almost monopolistic situation for the remaining companies like Lockheed Martin and SpaceX, which could drive up service prices. To maintain competition and control costs, the government needs to keep multiple competitors in the market, even if some don't meet the highest standards. This strategy creates a competitive market, though not perfect, but necessary to control prices and foster innovation. NASA clearly wants to have more options beyond SpaceX for spacecraft launches, as a monopoly would give too much advantage to Elon's company. But if that freedom comes with the risks that Boeing's spacecraft undoubtedly seems to bring, is it really worth it? To me, it's not. But perhaps NASA and Boeing will eventually find a solution, and we'll see Starliner become the masterpiece that Boeing's always wanted. Only time will tell. And to address the issues that Starliner encountered during its first flight, such as problems with 5 thrusters and a helium leak in the propulsion system, NASA and Boeing are conducting experiments on the Starliner spacecraft as well as at ground test facilities. They've used thrusters identical to those on Starliner, replicating the firing rates performed on the way to the space station. Ideally, engineers want thrusters to reach the same high operating temps that lead to their performance degradation in orbit. After these test series are complete, engineers manually inspect the thrusters to see if the overheating caused any damage.
What we found in this flight is we have fired the thrusters more than expected, and then I would say more frequently,
said Steve Stitch.
When I say frequently, I'm talking about how close you fire an individual thruster pulse to the next pulse of that thruster.
What we're trying to do at White Sands is really replicating exactly what those pulses were that those thrusters saw, and then understand the heating effect from those pulses, and then make sure that there's no unintended consequences of the pulses, Stitch explained. They believe that if the thrusters overheat on the ground and engineers can demonstrate they're not damaged by the additional thermal stress, officials will have more confidence in the propulsion system's ability to control the spacecraft after departing the space station. Moreover, understanding the thruster performance is crucial for future Starliner flights, determining whether changes are needed in the control software settings or the activation frequency to avoid overheating.
The way that we fly the flight, do we want to change that a little bit? Are there limits that we want to set differently in our software on how to deselect the thrusters? Those are the types of things that we want to learn,
said Mark Nappy, Vice President and Program Manager of Boeing's Commercial Crew Program. The test series began July 3rd with a series of firings simulating what one Starliner thruster experiences in orbit. However, engineers couldn't replicate the same heat levels on the ground as the thrusters did in space, so the tests got paused this week to find better ways to simulate the actual thermal conditions of the spacecraft. They hope to pick up testing this weekend and complete it by week's end. Starliner's maneuvering thrusters are housed in 4 thruster pods, known as doghouses, around the service module's perimeter. These doghouses function like thermos bottles, exacerbating the overheating problem with the thrusters.
We get a great deal of thermal kickback from the doghouse itself. And so not all the heat is coming, directly from the thruster or through the injector of the thruster.
Nappy said.
We're getting quite a bit of heat soak from the doghouse. So that's good information to have as we move forward and determine what the future mission profiles are going to look like.
Engineers are also validating their estimates of the additional helium the spacecraft carried to pressurize its propulsion system after Starliner detached from the space station. Managers believe there's sufficient helium margin to handle the several hours of flight from detachment till Starliner discards its service module just before re-entry. The service module burns up in the atmosphere, so Boeing won't recover it for a full diagnosis of the leakage and thruster issues. Starliner's reusable crew module will parachute to one of several potential landing sites in the western U.S. Boeing, as a manufacturer, has become a mess over the last 2 decades, struggling with the technical failure of its Starliner spacecraft on the ISS. As the pressure mounts, attention is shifting towards SpaceX as a potential solution to this crisis. However, no definitive decisions have been made yet as to who will rescue Starliner, whether it will be SpaceX's Dragon or something else. SpaceX to rescue Starliner? Why not? Starliner, launched on June 5th, is currently docked at the International Space Station on an indefinite mission. NASA and Boeing officials maintain that the spacecraft is in good condition and can leave the ISS in an emergency. However, both NASA and Boeing are trying to understand why some of the reaction control system thrusters on Starliner failed during the docking preparation with the ISS June 6th, and why some helium leaks appeared in the spacecraft's compartment. Because of this, Starliner will remain in space until at least the end of the summer as tests and analysis continue. This means astronauts brought up by Starliner have to stay on the ISS beyond their originally allocated days. NASA officials acknowledge that they might be there for a total of 90 days, 9 times longer than the mission's planned 10 days. However, it might even be longer since, after all, NASA has stated that Starliner has been evaluated to stay in orbit for 210 days once operation missions begin. Remember that flying into space is an extremely complex challenge, especially with manned flights. That's why NASA is striving to collect more data throughout this test process. Testing on June 15th in orbit was unable to find the root cause of the issues, although agency officials stressed on June 28th that progress has been made. The helium leaks have stabilized, and all but one of the errant thrusters is rated for use to come back to Earth. Starliner has 28 thrusters altogether in its RCS. 5 were misbehaving, and of those 5, only 1 will be taken offline during undocking. Repairs and testings continue in the coming days. Stay tuned for the latest updates from NASA about this. However, what if these tests fail to improve the Starliner? Well, they still have to rely on SpaceX. Although NASA and Boeing officials have reiterated that the current issues on Starliner do not indicate that SpaceX needs to assist, the Crew Dragon can still complete the mission. Scott Walter, who has a doctorate in mechanical space engineering, noted that nothing's off the table, suggesting that NASA's already spoken with SpaceX about a potential rescue mission, and the private Polaris Dawn spaceflight next month may also be a part of the agency's Plan B. Michael Lembeck, an aerospace engineering associate professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, said that NASA and Boeing are just doing their homework. It's too early to cause the root cause of the problem, said Lembeck, who was a consultant for Boeing's spaceflight division from 2008 to 2013. He continued to explain that keeping Starliner docked at the ISS is the only way to study the capsule fully. I would think that NASA is considering all contingencies well in advance, said Walter, who's the chief technical advisor for Visual Components North America. They've already thought these scenarios through if one of these capsules gets stranded or something goes wrong. They aren't suddenly scrambling to figure this out. He continued to explain that NASA and SpaceX have likely had a discussion behind the scenes about using the Dragon capsule. I think there is a Polaris Dawn mission with Jared Isaacman, which could potentially be turned into a rescue mission, Walter added. I am sure he would gladly say go ahead. Isaacman had funded the Polaris Dawn mission set to launch July 31st, which will see the first commercial spacewalk. As far as I know, Starliner's fine to come home, but if they gave up on that vehicle, then I realistically think NASA would just send Crew 9 up with 2 crew members, he said. The complexity and challenges associated with the developing and operating manned space vehicles are indeed very high. Every decision must be carefully weighed between collecting valuable data and ensuring the safety of the crew and assets. In fact, NASA has never had any rescue missions in space. To be honest, this is a very feasible scenario that NASA might face in the future. It needs to be explored and understood as humanity continues to advance in space. One only need look back to the Apollo 13 in 1970 to see the types of conditions that can occur with astronauts needing rescue. The 3 astronauts on the mission encountered an extremely dangerous situation when one of the 2 oxygen tanks exploded in space, turning the mission from a moon landing to a simple survival task. Their lifeline was ultimately the lunar module, which was connected to the command module, giving the astronauts a chance to return safely with the backup spacecraft. America has the obligation, ingenuity, and technological sophistication to ensure the safe return of all humans to Earth. ISS is now in its 25th year in low Earth orbit and has hosted over 270 astronauts. Meanwhile, China's Chang'e space station was completed in November 2023 and currently hosts 3 talconauts. Elsewhere, Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin have sent several space tourists and astronauts to low Earth orbit for short missions, and we will soon see humans returning to the moon and beyond. With these rapid developments in commercial space travel, you would expect a space rescue to be a top priority. In fact, this is an urgent issue, according to Shauna Penda, director of Space Medicine Group at the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. Pena argues that we're getting closer to being too late if we don't act immediately. When you start thinking maybe we should stop thinking about this, it means you are rapidly approaching the event horizon of that tipping point, and you are about to enter a phase of exponential growth, after which it will be extremely difficult to try to catch up, Pena said. The reality is that space companies have hardly any plans for space rescue. Pena wrote a report in October 2023 titled Safety and Rescue in Manned Space, Where Are the Gaps? The report looks at various aspects of rescue operations, including preventative measures, contingency planning, active rescue, and autonomy for self-rescue. Pena divides rescue operations into 3 categories: preventative measures and contingency planning, such as having backup vehicles available for deployment in case of disaster, active rescue capabilities like lifeboats or shelters in case of debris collision, and the autonomy and self-rescue capabilities of astronauts, on-the-spot repairs, prediction, and detection to enable astronauts to mitigate risks. However, the core issue is that there are some gaps in the existing frameworks. Currently, there are no binding international missions on space safety and rescue, a lack of regulation for commercial flights, threats related to deep space missions, a lack of medical evacuation for transit and operations on Mars, etc. Moreover, since many launches today are operated by the private space industry, these companies must also develop rescue capabilities, albeit with the support of regulatory and governmental environments. However, the discussion remains silent. Inevitably, there are many aspects to addressing these gaps in space rescue operations, and this topic can be divided into many categories. The main category, and perhaps the easiest to achieve at present, is to return to the previous methods, having an additional rocket and spacecraft on or near the launch pad for deployment as a lifeboat. However, Other widely discussed recommendations can be implemented now, including having standardized docking ports. Boeing Starliner and Lockheed Martin's Orion spacecraft comply with the ISS International Docking System standard, operating under a two-stage process, including soft and hard capture, allowing for docking and berthing. The IDSS docking interface is completely gender neutral, meaning the configuration can dock with an identical configuration. However, while SpaceX's Crew Dragon clearly docks with the ISS, the company has developed its own docking standard. Pena argues that all spacecraft must be compatible with existing IDSS. Furthermore, Cates adds in his report, theoretically, all ISS spacecraft can dock with each other, but there's still debate about whether the systems being used are completely gender neutral. Cates argues that all future space stations, commercial or otherwise, must adhere to the same connection standards, allowing any spacecraft to be easily used as a lifeboat if they need it. Currently, even if a backup vehicle is ready to deploy, without an international connection standard, the spacecraft is almost useless if it can't connect to the stranded module. Furthermore, he suggests that this approach can be easily integrated into all spacecraft if the companies developing them are obligated to comply with IDSS. In history, space exploration activities have been dominated by national space agencies like NASA in the US and Roscosmos in Russia. These agencies led the race to space, achieving major milestones like landing humans on the moon and building the ISS. Their dominance in exploration set high standards for technological advancements and international cooperation. However, in recent years, SpaceX has emerged as a leading company, challenging the status quo and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in space travel. With an innovative approach and relentless pursuit of sustainable and cost-effective space missions, SpaceX has not only captured the public's imagination, but also the attention of prominent competitors like Boeing, Blue Origin, and ULA. All of them seem to want to hinder SpaceX's development, particularly in the ongoing rocket program Starship. Starship, with its potential to become a versatile and revolutionary vehicle in space exploration, is gradually realizing that many people dream of a future beyond Earth. On the positive side, Starship could drive competition and innovation in the space industry, but at the same time, it's causing anxiety for well-established companies like Boeing. With its Starliner project facing many technical difficulties, Boeing is at risk of being left behind in the space race. The success of Starship could push Starliner into a difficult position, even at the risk of becoming obsolete. In this situation, it appears competitors are looking for ways to slow down the progress of Starship. Although Boeing may not directly intervene, ULA, a joint venture in which Boeing's got a stake, has made clear moves to stop SpaceX. Indeed, recently, we have seen ULA, along with Blue Origin, take strategic actions to hinder SpaceX's progress. ULA and Blue Origin have simultaneously filed lawsuits against the FAA to block SpaceX's Starship launch plans in Florida. ULA's lawsuit emphasizes several environmental concerns, arguing the FAA's current environmental impact statement for SpaceX's ops in Florida is inadequate. They contend that the increased activity at the launch sites, along with the environmental footprint of the massive Starship rockets, could pose significant risks to surrounding ecosystems. ULA points to the debris spread from a notable explosion in 2023 at SpaceX's Boca Chica site in Texas, which affected a 6-mile radius as a key example of potential hazards. On top of that, ULA raises technical and performance issues that SpaceX has encountered with Starship. They claim the rocket, still in its experimental phase, has not met expected performance levels, necessitating modifications to improve its capabilities. Specifically, ULA notes SpaceX plans to increase the size and thrust of Starship, which they argue could lead to greater environmental and safety concerns than previously assessed. ULA's argument centers on the assertion that the planned enhancements to Starship will significantly exceed the size and payload capacity of the current test models. These changes, according to ULA, require a comprehensive reevaluation of the environmental impact, particularly as SpaceX intends to launch a larger version of Starship from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. In response to these developments, the FAA is considering a new environmental impact statement to assess potential implications of SpaceX's proposed changes. The environmental assessment is crucial for several reasons. First, it addresses environmental and safety concerns raised by competitors like ULA, who have highlighted potential risks associated with the increasing size and thrust of the updated Starship rocket. By thoroughly evaluating these concerns, the FAA aims to ensure SpaceX's operations don't pose excessive risks to the environment and surrounding communities. The FAA's review process includes a comprehensive assessment of various factors, including potential impacts on local wildlife, air and water quality, noise levels, and the cumulative effects of repeated launches. This meticulous analysis helps identify any significant adverse impacts and determine necessary mitigation measures to minimize environmental harm. For SpaceX, the FAA's environmental assessment results are critical for the continuation and expansion of Starship. FAA approval allows SpaceX to proceed with its ambitious plans for Moon and Mars missions, facilitating the development and launch of larger, more powerful rockets. Conversely, any delays or restrictions from the review process could impact SpaceX's progress and operational plans, potentially hindering the company's competitive advantage in the rapidly evolving space industry. Furthermore, the FAA's decision will set a precedent for future space exploration activities, influencing regulatory standards and practices for other private space companies. As the industry grows and more players enter the field, the FAA's role in balancing innovation with safety and environmental management becomes more important. Besides environmental and technical issues, competitors have also expressed concerns about the feasibility of the Starship project. A key point in ULA's skepticism centers on the practicality of SpaceX's timelines for the Moon and Mars missions. Given the experimental nature of Starship and ongoing technical issues, ULA questions whether SpaceX can realistically achieve its lofty goals within the proposed timeframe. Recent explosions during test flights and subsequent technical glitches have only added to these concerns. Adding weight to ULA's doubts is a recent assessment by NASA, which also suggests potential delays in SpaceX's timeline for the Artemis 3 mission. Artemis 3, a cornerstone of NASA's lunar exploration plans, relies on SpaceX's Starship to transport astronauts to the lunar surface. NASA's assessment highlights several areas where SpaceX has to demonstrate reliable performance and technological readiness, including crucial in-orbit refueling systems necessary for extending space missions. This assessment also indicates that achieving these technological milestones could take longer than initially thought, potentially delaying Artemis 3's mission timeline. This delay not only affects NASA's lunar exploration schedule, but also impacts SpaceX's credibility and operational plans. In general, ULA's concerns are reflective of the broader industry's wariness about the aggressive timeline set by SpaceX. They argue that while SpaceX's vision is inspiring, the technical and logistical hurdles must be overcome to make these visions a reality. ULA points out that the complexity of space missions, particularly those involving human spaceflight and deep space travel, require rigorous testing, validation, and time, elements that cannot be rushed without compromising safety and success. Do you think the concerns of ULA and Blue Origin are reasonable? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, please subscribe to our channel. This will motivate us to keep pumping out more quality videos every day. All right, let's continue. In the face of opposition from competitors like ULA and Blue Origin, Elon remains undaunted and steadfast in his mission to advance space exploration. Musk's attitude towards these challenges reflects his characteristic confidence and determination. He often emphasizes that innovation inherently involves overcoming obstacles and criticism, viewing challenges as opportunities to improve and push the boundaries of what's possible. Despite legal and competitive pressures, SpaceX continues to make significant progress in the development of Starship. The company's engineers are working diligently to address technical issues and enhance the rocket's capabilities. Recent test flights and iterative improvements demonstrate SpaceX's commitment to refining Starship, ensuring that it meets and exceeds performance expectations. One of the most exciting aspects of SpaceX's ongoing development is the potential future upgrades for Starship. Elon's hinted at enhancements that could transform the rocket even to a more formidable vehicle for space exploration. These upgrades include increasing the size of Starship, allowing for bigger payloads and longer missions. The current model, standing at 121 meters tall and 9 meters in diameter, is already the biggest rocket ever built. However, future versions could increase the height and expand that diameter to 12 or even 18 meters. Increasing the size and fuel capacity of Starship's another critical focus. Larger fuel tanks will enable longer missions and heavier payloads, making missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond more feasible. This improvement is crucial for deep space travel, where the ability to carry and efficiently use more fuel can make a big difference in mission success. Furthermore, SpaceX is exploring advancements in engine power to support these larger rockets. Developing more powerful or additional engines will be necessary to manage the increasing size and weight, ensuring Starship can achieve its ambitious missions. These modifications are being carefully considered to maintain the spacecraft's efficiency and safety, balancing innovative design with practical engineering solutions. Florida, the holy land of the world's aerospace industry, once shone brightly during NASA's era with Saturn V and Space Shuttle. It was thought that the glory would fade when those vehicles retired, but SpaceX emerged and elevated that legacy. Launching more frequently, landing continuously, and particularly with superior rocket reusability, SpaceX has not only inherited but surpassed NASA's achievements, continually shocking everyone in the global space industry. Recently, once again, SpaceX just did something in Florida more mind-blowing than any of us thought. Failure is not an option, and that's a motto that's existed in the history of the aerospace industry and still holds true today. With SpaceX's Falcon rocket line, although it has become extremely reliable to the world, that doesn't mean it doesn't have a problem. What's bound to happen will happen, and after 7 years of excellent service, the upper stage of the Falcon unexpectedly encountered an issue up there in space. While this might be a disappointment for rocket enthusiasts like us, for SpaceX, it wasn't that much of a burden. Unexpected technical malfunctions seem to have appeared frequently in all their rocket manufacturing work. Therefore, it's not surprising to see how quickly SpaceX handled this. The incident happened July 11th, and just 10 days later, SpaceX sent an incident report to the FAA to apply for a relaunch permit for Falcon 9. By July 26th, SpaceX got permission from the government agency to resume launching Falcon 9. And on July 27th, Falcon 9 officially returned to space. This extremely rapid turnaround time surprised all of us. If we calculate it simply, the suspension period for Falcon 9 was just 15 days, which is quite short compared to all the other previous suspensions due to incidents in the aerospace industry. Notably, we mentioned the over 1 year suspension of Blue Origin's suborbital rocket New Shepard. At that time, Blue Origin also promised a quick return after several months of research, but the FAA's results showed that their investigation and technical fixes were not swift, which was the main reason the spacecraft couldn't fly. Virgin Galactic's VSS Unity spacecraft was also suspended by FAA for several months due to a misaligned pen detaching after a suborbital mission. Even the Soyuz spacecraft from Russia, a historic rocket with over 1,000 flights, couldn't avoid errors and was grounded for several months of investigation. From these examples, we can see how outstanding SpaceX is in identifying and resolving issues quickly. This speed is largely related to the fact that the problem turned out to not be too serious. The cause of the accident was a cracked fuel line at the liquid oxygen pressure sensor in the second stage. The line cracked due to fatigue from high loads from engine vibrations and a loose retaining clamp. After identifying the cause, SpaceX decided to remove the liquid oxygen pressure sensors from the second stages of future Falcon 9 rockets. The issue is that their frustration is duplicated by alternative sensors already present in the engine. Engineers also conducted additional inspections of all fuel lines and sensor clamps on upcoming Falcon 9 flights, and in some cases, proactively replaced them. For near-term Falcon launches, the failed sense line and sensor on the second stage engine will be removed, SpaceX wrote in an anomaly update on July 25th. The sensor is not used by the flight safety system and can be recovered by alternate sensors already present on the engine. After overcoming the obstacle, SpaceX did not choose the safe path, but instead accelerated the process. With burning passion and immense confidence, they made a bold decision to carry out 3 straight launches from the Florida launch pad. This was the initial push for SpaceX's campaign to increase launch frequency at the historic Florida launch site. Rocket launches in Cape Canaveral, Florida have undergone major developments since the first launch back in 1950. At first, these were rare, highly noteworthy events that caused people to stop what they were doing and watch. Over time, the frequency of rocket launches has gone up. Now, rocket launches have become routine, no longer a reason to skip out on school or work like they once were. This reflects advancements in technology and the growth of the space industry. SpaceX, Elon's company, has played a huge role in this transformation. Their Falcon 9 rockets accounted for 94% of the launches in Florida for 2024. Demonstrating SpaceX's dominance in the commercial space sector. Weekly Falcon 9 rockets have created a stable and predictable schedule, increasing the efficiency of space operations and making it easier for the public to follow these launches. Despite a 2-week lull, SpaceX quickly caught up and resumed their launches by sending 23 Starlink satellites from Kennedy Space Center early on Saturday, July 27th. The next launch happened Sunday the 28th, when a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 23 Starlink satellites lifted off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. This was the 14th mission for this Falcon 9 first stage and 300th reflight of a booster, SpaceX announced in a post on X. Oh my goodness. Even these initial launches set a new record. Truly amazing, and Elon could not hide his joy and shared a SpaceX post. 300th reuse of a Falcon rocket boost stage. The third Falcon 9 launched hours later from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. This rocket carried 21 Starlink satellites, including 13 capable of delivering service right to mobile phones. According to SpaceX, 3 missions were completely successful. The first stages of the rocket successfully landed on sea-based drone ships, and the upper stages deployed the Starlink satellites into LEO as planned. With this launch, Falcon 9 has completed 73 launches since the start of the year with a 98.6% success rate. A++, and that's a dream number for many rockets worldwide. On top of that, it achieved an impressive feat with 49 launches from 2 pads in Florida, significantly more than previous years, and of course, more than the launches on the West Coast and California. However, SpaceX hoped to launch once a week from Vandenberg in 2024. With increased business from Florida, the ability to launch more Starlink missions from Cali could benefit bandwidth improvement. In the coming years, SpaceX could launch as many in Florida around 2023. Increasing the launch frequency is a goal with much potential, but achieving it is not a simple task. Only SpaceX can accomplish this, and only Falcon 9 is capable of doing it. Placing Falcon 9 in the current launch market, it's undeniable, and it dominates satellite launches, and more importantly, low Earth orbit launches carrying cargo and astronauts to the ISS. NASA's looking forward to Falcon 9 launching at the Northrop Grumman Singa supply ship to the ISS on August 3rd, followed by the SpaceX Crew Dragon flight carrying 3 agency astronauts and a Russian cosmonaut to the lab around August 18th. The second stage slated for use with a piloted flight, known as Crew 9, will be test-fired in the coming days at a SpaceX facility near McGregor, Texas, to verify the company's corrective action will have no unexpected consequences. It's going to undergo a second-stage hot fire on the 30th of July, and that's really to check out some of the new modifications that the vehicle will have as a result of the anomaly, said Steve Stitch, NASA's Commercial Crew Program, said on Friday. We have been following along step by step with that investigation that the FAA has been doing. SpaceX has been very transparent. We've had our teams embedded in the investigation and following along all the changes on that booster. The space agency has not formally cleared those flights for launch, but SpaceX's successful return to flight this weekend no doubt plays a role in the eventual decision. Boeing engineers also had a busy weekend, successfully test-firing 27 maneuvering thrusters in the company's Starliner capsule now docked at the ISS. The tests verified good performance with Reaction Control System (RCS) thrusters that ran into problems earlier and confirmed that known helium leaks in the capsule's propulsion system had remained stable and not worsened. Other tests also showed that the thrusters will work properly during the ship's eventual return to Earth. The one-pulse firings were designed to confirm the performance of each thruster, Boeing wrote in an update. Between each firing, the team reviewed data real-time, and all thrusters performed at peak thrust rating values. The helium system also remained stable, the company said. Additionally, an RCS oxidizer isolation valve that was not fully seated previously was cycled 7 times during Saturday's testing and is now operating normally. Launched June 5th on the spacecraft's first piloted test flight, the Starliner crew commander, Barry Butch Wilmore, and co-pilot Sunita Williams originally expected to spend about 8 days in space. That mission has now lasted nearly 2 months because of work to troubleshoot the thruster issues and 5 helium leaks, 1 detected before launch and 4 developed during the capsule's rendezvous with the space station. NASA is expected to hold a major review late this week to assess the test data and determine the ship's readiness to bring Wilmore and Williams safely back home. As for SpaceX and Falcon 9, the company blamed the July 11th failure on a crack in an upper stage sensor line, caused by a loose bracket and metal fatigue that led to a liquid oxygen leak. Sarah Walker, a senior manager at SpaceX, said for piloted Crew Dragon flights, the second stage engine only fires once, and the leak that derailed the Starlink launch would not have been a factor in a crewed flight. In any case, the fitting that leaked will be removed. I'm extremely confident of the team, the integrated approach in which NASA is incorporated into the response, said Nick Hague, Crew 9 co-pilot and veteran of a Russian Soyuz launch abort, and I'm excited to strap onto the rocket when the team decides it's time to go. He said the crew was training at SpaceX's Hawthorne, California headquarters the day after the Starlink launch anomaly occurred, and from the get-go, they brought us into the conversation and told us everything that they knew. Along with providing an update on SpaceX's near-term Falcon 9 plans, Walker also addressed an unexpected issue with debris from Crew Dragon trunk sessions that managed to survive the heat of re-entry to hit the ground. The trunk section, outfitted with solar cells, helps power the Crew Dragon in space and carries external station payloads to orbit in an unpressurized environment. Before re-entry, the trunk is jettisoned. The crew capsule, equipped with a heat shield, then fires its braking rockets to drop out of orbit for a precisely targeted ocean splashdown. The trunk continues on in low orbit and eventually makes an uncontrolled re-entry. Early in the program, engineers concluded the entire trunk would completely burn up during re-entry, but on several occasions, relatively large, charred chunks of trunk debris have survived entry to hit the ground. Returning Crew Dragon astronauts and recently launched cargo Dragon supply ships have all returned to splashdowns off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic Ocean. Walker said SpaceX now plans to move all cargo and Crew Dragon splashdowns to the Pacific Ocean off the West Coast. Trunk sections will now be jettisoned after the deorbit rocket firing, making sure they all fall back into the atmosphere in roughly the same area the crew and cargo capsules do, that is, well offshore. After more than 7 years, for the first time, Falcon 9 encountered a problem. But Elon Musk has proven that this is not too big of an issue for SpaceX. So, what basis does Elon have to assert this claim? Who's really worried when Falcon 9 gets grounded? Whenever a groundbreaking technological feat happens so often that it becomes familiar, what once seemed remarkable becomes ordinary. Something astonishing just a few years ago, like landing a rocket vertically on a barge, is now met with a collective yawn. Widespread interest is only sparked when something bad happens. This pattern has repeated itself in the Apollo moon landings, space shuttle flights, and the feats of Mars rovers. SpaceX's Falcon 9 is no exception. As we know, the shocking news for space enthusiasts last week was the incident with SpaceX's workhorse, the Falcon 9. However, it wasn't really a shock in the literal sense when considering the entire industry, because in reality, the challenges faced in space are always surprises that we can't see coming. Therefore, SpaceX is handling the Falcon 9 issue quite calmly. After identifying the cause of mission failure as a liquid oxygen leak, SpaceX quickly requested the FAA on July 15th to continue Falcon 9 flights during the mandatory investigation, because usually companies have to stop launches during such investigations. SpaceX wants the FAA to decide if it's safe to keep launching. If the FAA finds the problem didn't affect important safety systems to put the public at risk, SpaceX could be allowed to continue their launches. The FAA said they're looking at SpaceX's request carefully. The FAA is reviewing the request by SpaceX and will be guided by data and safety at every step of the process. The FAA is responsible for and committed to protecting the public during commercial space transportation, launch, and re-entry operations, the FAA wrote in an emailed statement. Next, in its July 16th statement, the FAA said the public safety determination request would be evaluated on matters including safety-critical systems, the nature and consequences of the anomaly, the adequacy of existing flight safety analysis, safety organization performance, and environmental factors. If the FAA agrees no public safety issues were involved, the statement added, the operator can return to flight while the investigation stays open, provided all other license requirements are met. The FAA has not provided a timeline for its evaluation of the request, which is quite common in aerospace safety investigations due to the complex nature of spaceflight. Despite this, the FAA's response gives us an understanding that SpaceX might soon be able to launch the Falcon 9 even if the FAA's investigation is not yet complete. Drop us a heart in the comments to give some energy to Falcon 9, and don't forget to please like and subscribe to our channel. Honestly, it would be amazing if Falcon 9 got back on track. And it's not just us who believe in this swift return. Even the top officials at the United States Space Command do so too. General Stephen Whiting, commander of the U.S. Space Command, speaking at the Aspen Security Forum on July 17th, revealed that he visited SpaceX's Starlink satellite factory in Seattle the day after a July 11th incident that led to the grounding of the Falcon 9 fleet. We showed up, and some of their senior leaders were there, and they were very transparent, giving us insight into what happened, Whiting said. So I personally have full confidence in SpaceX working with the FAA, working with NASA, working with Space Force to figure out what happened and continue launching. Whiting emphasized SpaceX's track record, noting that the company has launched the Falcon 9 hundreds of times, and they'll figure this out quickly. Indeed, in the past, Falcon 9 has demonstrated its high reliability. The current version of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, known as Falcon 9 Block 5, is undoubtedly the most reliable launch vehicle in history. Since its debut back in May 2018, the Falcon 9 Block 5, certified by NASA for crewed flights, has never encountered a failure in all 297 launches before the unfortunate Starlink 9-3 mission. Even if last week's Falcon 9 Block 5 launch is considered a failure, the rocket still has a success rate of 99.7%. This is an enviable number for any launch company. Looking back at its history, Falcon 9's rocket line has undergone remarkable development. Since 2010, SpaceX launched 354 flights of the Falcon 9, including retired versions of the vehicle. The more powerful Falcon Heavy, which uses 3 Falcon 9 boosters connected together, has flown 10 times. There have been some failures in the early years of the Falcon 9 rocket. A first-stage engine incident during the 4th Falcon 9 flight launch in 2012 prevented the rocket from deploying a secondary payload into the correct orbit. But SpaceX was still able to complete the primary mission of delivering cargo to the ISS. The only in-flight failure of the Falcon 9 occurred on the 19th flight on June 28 back in 2015, when the upper stage liquid oxygen tank exploded a few minutes after launch from Cape Canaveral Space Station in Florida. The rocket broke up in the upper atmosphere, causing a Dragon cargo capsule en route to the space station to fall. SpaceX resumed Falcon 9 launches 6 months later in December 2015. On that flight, SpaceX landed the first stage booster of the Falcon 9 back at Cape Canaveral for the first time, a historic achievement and a harbinger of the company's later success in reusing rockets. 9 SpaceX missions were launched flawlessly before Falcon 9's rocket exploded on the launch pad during a pre-launch test on September 3, 2016. This was not an in-flight failure, but the fireball destroyed Israel's Amos 6 communications satellite mounted atop the Falcon 9 rocket. Engineers determined the cause to be a failure of the upper stage helium tank. Since then, everything's gone smoothly with SpaceX's Falcon rocket line, with 335 consecutive successful launches since the 2016 pad explosion or 344 flights since an in-flight incident. Both numbers are all-time industry records. The first Falcon Heavy rocket was launched in 2018, and SpaceX launched its astronaut mission under a contract with NASA in May of 2020. SpaceX increased its flight frequency from 18 launches in 2017 to 96 Falcon rocket launches in 2023. In 2024, that number went up to 144 launches. Although with the current situation, it can be said that SpaceX is unlikely to reach the milestone exactly as previously planned. The number of launches will certainly not be less than what was last year. Elon Musk also said this after the problem occurred. "We are tracking to do more Falcon flights this year than Shuttle did in 30 years, the vast majority of which are uncrewed. A major advantage of this super high flight rate is that we can identify and resolve problems that may only occur once every 1,000 flights. This is impossible on a low flight rate vehicle." However, the Falcon 9 incident has caused considerable concern, especially for NASA with its crewed and cargo flights to the ISS. Since the shuttle program ended in 2011, NASA has partnered with SpaceX and Boeing to develop commercial crew vehicles, replacing the exclusive role of the Soyuz aircraft. SpaceX has quickly become NASA's top choice, starting with a successful test flight in 2020. But following the rare Falcon 9 failure during the Starlink satellite launch, SpaceX faces delays in sending astronauts in space due to the different variants of the same rocket used for both satellite and crew launches. This issue with SpaceX's rocket highlights the long-term ISS strategy of having multiple available spacecraft. Meanwhile, Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, which NASA arguably holds in higher regard than SpaceX's Dragon for some reason, is in an even worse situation as it remains in space with no specific return date for its 2 astronauts. Currently, NASA has no spacecraft capable of taking astronauts to the ISS besides SpaceX, which is under investigation. This starkly demonstrates SpaceX's dominance in the launch market and the government's dependence on a private company, a painful reminder for NASA. Therefore, NASA's always sought more options for space projects beyond just SpaceX. However, it cannot be denied that few companies can match SpaceX's capabilities. To avoid too much disruption to their space mission schedules, NASA's best course of action now is to actively collaborate with SpaceX and expedite the investigation into the Falcon 9 issue. And you shouldn't worry too much. Space incidents that space programs have faced over the decades are not new. Even reliable and well-tested space machines can fail, sometimes fatally, as both Soyuz and the Space Shuttle have experienced. The Falcon 9 issue is just one among many. Alongside NASA's concerns, startups that rely on SpaceX flights to demonstrate new technologies and generate revenue are also anxious. SpaceX announced in April that, attracted by the reliability and frequency of the Falcon 9, more than 130 customers have used the company's rideshare program. Without SpaceX, investors got few options. There are a few other new rockets out there, like Ariane 6, ULA's Vulcan, and Mitsubishi Heavy's H3. However, these also have a list of customers who've been patiently waiting, some for many years. Additionally, operators would struggle to increase their launch pace to take advantage of any opportunities arising from SpaceX's prolonged delay. Customers who have designed their satellites for Falcon 9 may also need time to make adjustments for a different rocket. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching and see you next time.